In the middle of a busy city where tall buildings stretched into the sky and streets were always filled with noise and movement, there was a small park that seemed to exist in its own quiet world. On one sunny morning, billionaire Richard Lawson decided to take his daughter Mia to the park as he did every weekend, despite his immense wealth and the empire he had built. Richard often felt a distance between himself and the simple joys of life. Mia, on the other hand, was curious, energetic, and full of wonder. She loved the park for its freedom and its quiet corners, a stark contrast to the rigid structure of her luxurious home. As they entered the park, Mia ran ahead, while Richard followed, slowly observing the children playing and the families walking hand in hand. The smell of fresh grass and the sound of laughter filled the air, creating a calm that Richard rarely experienced. One particular girl caught Mia's attention. She was sitting on the ground, her legs crossed, with a small group of children surrounding her. In her hands, she held pieces of chalk, and with careful patience, she was drawing letters and numbers, showing the smaller children how to form them properly. Her clothes were simple, worn and faded, and her hair fell loosely around her face, yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she taught, and a confidence in her voice that immediately drew Mia closer. Mia approached her, cautiously. "Hi, I am Mia. Can you teach me too?" she asked. The girl looked up, and for a moment, there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Then she smiled softly and nodded. "Of course, I am Leela," she said calmly. "Please sit, and I will show you." Mia eagerly sat down beside her and watched as Leela began to explain the numbers in a way that made sense, not just by telling her the answers, but by encouraging her to think and figure things out on her own. Each time Mia hesitated, Leela would gently guide her, praise her efforts, and patiently wait as she tried. Richard had stopped walking. He stood a few feet away, watching the interaction with a mixture of curiosity and awe. He had expected Mia to run off and play, or perhaps become distracted by other children, but she remained completely absorbed in Lila's teaching, and her face glowed with excitement. He realized that in this small, quiet corner of the park, something extraordinary was happening. A girl with nothing was giving his daughter lessons that no expensive tutor or school had ever taught her. Over the following weeks, Mia returned to the park with growing anticipation. She always sought out Leela first and sat attentively as she shared her knowledge. Sometimes they worked with numbers, other times they read simple stories or explored ideas about kindness, patience, and resilience. Lila's voice was always calm, steady, and encouraging. She asked questions and made Mia think. She praised her for effort, not perfection, and created a small, safe space where learning was joyful and inclusive. Richard began to notice changes in Mia. She became more thoughtful when interacting with other children. She asked questions about fairness and helping others. She shared her snacks quietly without being asked, and spoke about people in the park with a newfound empathy. Richard observed all of this, silently realizing that his daughter was learning something far more important than academic knowledge. She was learning life lessons, lessons of kindness, patience, and understanding from a girl who had very little yet gave so much. One afternoon, Richard approached Lila as Mia was arranging sticks and stones to form letters. Lila looked up and he asked gently, "Where do you live?" Lila hesitated for a moment before replying, "I do not have a permanent home. I stay wherever I can." "And your parents?" he asked softly. "My mother passed away," she said simply, "and my father left before that." Richard felt a pang in his chest. The stark contrast between his own life filled with luxury and comfort and the life of this young girl teaching children in a park was overwhelming. Despite her hardships, Leela continued to teach with patience and humility. She never asked for money or favors, and yet she gave freely of her time and knowledge. Observing this, Richard felt a deep sense of admiration and humility. He realized that he had never truly understood what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. To learn without judgment, to teach with love. Richard decided that he wanted to help Leela in a way that would have a lasting impact. He began bringing extra books and pencils to the park, which Lila accepted politely. Without complaint, she shared some of the food with other children who were watching her. She had a quiet way of teaching the value of sharing and community that touched both Mia and Richard profoundly. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Mia and Lila deepened. Emily now eagerly taught the smaller children. Under Lila's guidance, Richard watched from a distance, noticing the way Leela's influence was spreading gently but surely among everyone she encountered. He realized that the lessons were not only for Mia but for him as well. He was learning humility, empathy, and the importance of human connection through a child who had faced more hardship than he could imagine. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the park, Mia hugged Leela tightly. "Thank you for teaching me," she whispered. Leela smiled softly and said, "You are learning well." Mia looked up at her father and said, "Daddy, I want to help Leela and her friends have a school like mine." Richard nodded and felt a determination in his heart. He understood that this moment was the beginning of something much larger, that a life could be changed, not by money alone, but by guidance, compassion, and opportunity. Richard arranged for Leela to attend a small community school, providing her with books, supplies, and a safe place to stay. Mia helped her adjust, and together they navigated the challenges of new routines and learning environments. Despite difficulties, Leela excelled, her resilience and intelligence shining through. She became a symbol, not just for Mia, but for the community, of what determination, courage, and generosity could achieve. Quietly funded educational programs for children who had been overlooked, offering them support in ways that created real opportunity. Without publicity, his empire, which once defined him solely by wealth and influence, now became a tool to uplift those in need. He visited shelters and schools, listened to stories, and saw firsthand how access to resources, combined with mentorship, could change lives permanently. As Leela flourished academically, she still returned to the park. The tree where she had first met Mia remained her special place, a place to reflect, teach, and share her wisdom. She had grown in knowledge, confidence, and opportunity, but her spirit remained unchanged, gentle, humble, and focused on helping others. Emily continued to learn from her friend and her father, watching and absorbing lessons about kindness, generosity, and empathy. Richard saw the transformation in both of them and felt an overwhelming gratitude to the girl who had entered their lives with nothing, yet gave so much. They had learned that true wealth is measured not by money, but by the ability to care, to share, to teach, and to make a difference. The impact of a single encounter in a park between a billionaire, his daughter, and a homeless girl rippled beyond their immediate lives. Children began attending school programs Richard had funded, teachers noticed acts of kindness and compassion, spreading quietly throughout the city. Lila became a living example of how courage and wisdom can shine even from the most unexpected places, and how the simplest acts of teaching can create extraordinary change. Richard often reflected on the journey that had begun so unexpectedly. One small act of teaching had revealed to him a world richer than he had ever known, a world measured in empathy, understanding, and connection, rather than profit or power. He had discovered that to change lives, one did not need grand gestures, only consistent care, attention, and the willingness to see value in every human being. And it all began with a park, a girl with chalk and stones, and a young daughter eager to learn. A billionaire had seen a homeless girl teaching his child, and what followed was a transformation none of them could have anticipated. The lesson was clear and unforgettable. True wealth is the ability to touch lives, to inspire hope, and to nurture the potential within others. Weeks passed, and the park became more than a place of play. It became a place of learning, connection, and quiet reflection. Alexander Hayes began to notice the changes, not only in his daughter Mia, but in himself. Every Sunday they arrived early and sought out Leela, sitting under the same tree, patiently waiting to teach Emily, and sometimes the smaller children who gathered around her. Her presence was calm yet commanding in its quiet way. She had the ability to focus on each child individually, while keeping an eye on the group and ensuring no one was left behind. Emily had grown in confidence and kindness. She helped younger children form letters with sticks and stones. She shared her snacks quietly and spoke to them gently, as if Leela had taught her more than letters and numbers. She had learned empathy, patience, and humility, all through the example of a girl who had nothing yet gave everything. Richard watched silently, realizing that these moments were changing his daughter in ways no school could. One morning, as the sun rose over the park, Richard carried extra notebooks and pencils, which he placed in Lila's lap. She looked up and smiled with quiet gratitude and acceptance. "Thank you," she said simply. "It is nothing," he replied, noticing how effortlessly she accepted gifts without pride or shame. She shared the supplies with other children, demonstrating that learning and kindness were not about ownership, but about sharing and opportunities. Weeks turned into months. Lila began attending a small community school arranged by Richard Reese. She struggled at first, adjusting to routines and rules she had never experienced, but her determination never wavered. Emily was there by her side, supporting her, guiding her, and celebrating small victories along the way. The bond between the two girls strengthened, and a quiet friendship developed that went beyond circumstance and comfort. It was rooted in respect, learning, and shared curiosity. Became deeply involved, quietly funding programs to support children like Lila. He visited shelters, schools, and community centers, listening to stories, observing needs, and finding ways to provide resources and mentorship. The empire he had built was now a tool to create real change. He began to understand that true influence came not from money alone, but from compassion, deliberate action, and the ability to empower others. In the park, Leela continued her lessons. She sat under the same tree, teaching small groups of children, reading stories, explaining ideas, and encouraging each child to think independently. Her calm voice was patient, her instructions clear, and her encouragement constant. The children who once struggled began to flourish. The park slowly transformed into a hub of learning, kindness, and inspiration, all led by a young girl who had once had nothing. Emily had adopted many of Leela's habits. She helped children without being asked. She shared her resources, and she learned to consider others' perspectives. She asked questions about fairness, justice, and opportunity, and sought ways to make a difference. She had learned through example that actions mattered more than words, that kindness created ripples that could not be measured in money or possessions. One afternoon, Richard watched Lila help a child struggling with reading. He felt a deep sense of awe and gratitude for the girl who had entered their lives so quietly and transformed them all. He realized that observing and listening had taught him more than any business deal or board meeting ever could. He was learning patience, humility, empathy, and the true meaning of giving. Richard continued to expand opportunities, quietly ensuring that children like Lila had access to education, mentorship, and safe environments. He focused on creating sustainable change rather than temporary fixes. The programs he funded encouraged children to teach one another, to support one another, and to believe in their own potential. Lila became a living example of resilience, courage, and generosities. The months went on. Leela excelled academically, and socially her confidence grew, and she inspired those around her. Teachers noticed her dedication and willingness to help others, and she quietly influenced the community with her example. She had learned to navigate the world outside the park, but she returned often to her tree to teach, observe, and reflect. She remained humble, kind, and focused on giving back. Emily learned alongside her friend each lesson Lila taught created a lasting impression on her young mind. She learned to value effort over success, to empathize with those in need, and to understand that wealth meant nothing without compassion. The friendship between Mia and Lila strengthened, not just through learning, but through shared experiences and mutual respect. Richard observed all of this and felt a profound transformation within himself. He had entered the park, a man defined by wealth, power, and business acumen, yet he now understood that true legacy came from helping others, nurturing potential, and creating opportunities for growth. He had learned that life lessons often come from the most unexpected places, and that guidance, compassion, and kindness could change lives permanently. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Mia hugged Leela tightly. "You taught me the most important thing," she whispered. Leela smiled and replied, "And what is that?" Mia said, "Being kind is more important than being rich." Richard stood nearby, his heart full. He had learned that a single act of teaching, a single gesture of care, could ripple outward, changing lives in ways he could never have imagined. The park remained their sanctuary. Leela continued to teach and inspire children. Richard continued his quiet work, funding programs and supporting education, and Mia continued to grow into a thoughtful, compassionate child who understood the value of empathy and action. The lessons that began with chalk and stones had become a journey of transformation for all involved. News of Leela's dedication and the programs inspired by Richard quietly reached others. Teachers, volunteers, and community members began to notice the small changes. Children became more patient and kind, and the ripple of compassion began spreading beyond the park. The impact of a single child's dedication to teaching and a father's willingness to listen had created change that would last for generations. Reflected often on how unexpectedly their lives had been transformed by a chance meeting in the park, he realized that money and power could never replace love, patience, kindness, and empathy, that it was the simple acts of teaching, sharing, and caring that held the greatest power. The homeless girl who had taught his daughter had become their teacher in the most profound sense, and the lessons would last a lifetime. And so life continued. Sundays at the park remained a time for learning, growth, and connection. Lila's quiet influence reached far beyond the children. She taught Alexander now. Richard knew that wealth without purpose was empty, and that true success lay in the ability to change lives for the better through understanding, compassion, and deliberate action. The story of the homeless girl who taught a billionaire's daughter was now a story that would inspire all who heard it, reminding them that the smallest acts of care could have the most extraordinary impact.